Oh, Holy Spirit, visit us in this place. Make your presence known. Let my words be inspirational through what you say through me. Help me get out of the way and help us to hear what we need to hear. Some things I may have planned, but some things I may not have planned. Let it be so. In your name we pray. So it was back in 1865 that an English author by this name wrote a classic book, an epic book that charms adults and children yet to this day. His name was Charles Lutwidge Dodson. Anybody know him? Well, keep listening. His stories were populated by peculiar characters, anthropomorphic, which are with human-like features. Some have called his work a quintessential literary piece of fantastic fantasy genre. If I tell you the name of the 2010 movie by Tim Burton, maybe you'll come closer. Johnny Depp, Anne Hathaway, and Helena Bonham Carter were in it. If I told you that he wrote under the pen name Lewis Carroll, would that make any difference? Who wrote Alice Adventures in Wonderland? You didn't know Charles Lutwidge Dodson. No wonder he called himself Lewis. At some point, after she made her famous tumble down the rabbit hole, she encounters a caterpillar. I looked at the film score. Alan Rickman, God rest his soul, was the caterpillar in the story. And at one point, he looks at Alice and says, "Who are you?" To which she says in the 1865 Lewis Carroll version, I hardly know it, present sir. At least I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I may have changed several times since then. You ever had a day like that? Not sure which side of the bed you got up on or where you're going. It's a nice segue into where I want to go with today's sermon, along with the text, and just to introduce these ideas of transition to you. Life is full of changes. We know at every age and every stage. Our children heading off to school are in the midst of a transition. Mama's in the midst of a transition. Her last child heads off to kindergarten. Those are teary times. Those are all adjustments, and we have them at different points. When our kids leave for college or leave the country for college, then there's a transition. One day you're walking along minding your own business, and the next thing you know, a rabbit appears and you chase it down a hole, or you fall down a hole into what you don't know, or for how long you don't know, but it happens. The hope is, unlike Alice, that we will not have to endure changes as quickly as she did, and that we won't forget who we are from morning to evening, and that we'll have someone to help us make sense of the changes that we experience along the way, lest we go mad like the Hatter. That was a joke. Lest we go mad like the Hatter. No, seriously, life is tough. We all face different transitions or changes. Let's start with change. I told you last week in the sermon, for those of you who were here, that we often confuse the concept of change and transition. Change is a situational thing. It's an event that happens in time. We have a baby, we move to a new house, we start school, whatever. However, transition is a psychological process. It's the way that we learn how to make sense of the change and integrate that change into our life. And that takes a lot longer time. Some of us do better with that transition than others do. What I want to talk to you about is just that. Here's what I would call the sticky sentence for today. Life is full of changes. Changes are situational. Transition is psychological. It's a process. But it's a natural process of disorientation and reorientation. The last thing I want to tell you about that is that faith is also a transitional process and a development process. And the more we learn to make sense of both life and faith development, the healthier we'll be in our adult journeys. That's the premise of today's sermon. I want you to look at the second question in your bulletin. I want you to think about times that you've had junctures in your life where you felt restless or unsettled. And I want you, in the comfort of your church family, if you're willing, to say, what were those times? What were those situations? Do you know how old you were? Somebody jump in. A transition time or a time that you felt restless. Maybe you knew why, maybe you didn't know. I'm sorry? Moving? Moving. One of life's greatest transitions. Especially if you leave state or leave the country. Somebody else. Kid heads off to school. Yes?
After 8 years of being the only child, having a younger sibling.
A younger sibling after being the 8 years the princess. Yeah, that's tough. 11. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a huge transition. Somebody retiring, huge. And some people do that better than others. Some people never develop a new identity outside of their work. Yeah.
I think when you realize you're actually growing older.
When you realize, you know what I really realized that I knew all along, but when I had my cataract surgery, oh my gosh, I looked in the mirror, there were wrinkles there I didn't even know I had. I'm serious. Yeah.
Divorce and becoming a single parent, getting a full-time job.
Divorce, becoming a single parent, full-time job, and dating again, if folks want to date.
Oh yeah, that was it.
Yeah, that too. Boy, that's like being in high school all over again. Casey.
Having your first baby.
Having your first baby. Absolutely. So, a restlessness. Sometimes we know what that restlessness is about. Other times we're restless and we don't really know what it's about. Some of us try to make sense of that by, it gets so bad, maybe we go to a counselor. Or maybe we pick up reading material to try to understand it. Is this normal for this time in life? Or having experienced this, is this a normal reaction? Some of us wade on through it and we don't get help. Some of us crash and burn. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you, as a pastor, I have kept myself. I have actually here, I've done the same thing, but I have tried to keep myself in a counseling relationship because let me tell you, life gets tough and hard, and there's a lot I can't figure out on my own. And being a solo pastor in a church of this size is tough because there's never enough of me for you. And I'm very aware of that. Some of you who know me well know how much I struggle with that. So we all need help to try to make sense of things. Get the help however you can. Come see me, see a counselor, get into a new group, have a new hobby, do something to help. Many years ago, 1974, Gail Sheehy wrote a book called Passages. You remember that? Where she talked about the adult life as being lived out in phases, and she talked about all of those phases as being an opportunity for creative change and growth. She talked about that it's inevitable that we're going to have personality changes, that we'll have sexual changes that we go through as we go through life as well. She talked about the trying 20s, where the safety of home, we leave that behind. We begin trying on life's uniforms and possible partners, and we strike out into the brave unknown. Sound like anybody got John read to you about this morning? I don't know about you, but when I Googled the prodigal son, the images that came up for me were, he looked like he was about in his 20s or early 30s, by all the artist renditions. He was probably right on schedule to be setting out. Then there's the catch-30s, as she says, that somehow our illusions somewhere along that way get shaken, and it's time to make, break, or deepen life's commitments. So maybe the prodigal son was on the cusp of 29 and 30 because he went out and did all the living and trying on things, but then he got shaken up and came to his senses. So maybe he was on the cusp of that. Or maybe he just had an early midlife crisis. Or maybe it was the famine. Maybe if the famine hadn't come along, he would still be out there partying. As long as the booze is around and the women were around, why not? Maybe the famine. Maybe we can blame the famine on his change. She talks about the forlorn 40s, dangerous years when the dreams of youth need reassessment. If you remember your 40s, I love what I do, but remember I told you I always wanted to be a lawyer. Man, I spent a lot, probably the first 5 years of my 40 years thinking, what if I learned the law school? You ever second guess your career? Wondered what would have happened if? How life could have have changed if I had gotten pregnant, if I hadn't gotten pregnant, I hope that's not the case. But if I had chosen a different career path, if I had not made that move, if I had not trusted that person. Then she talks about the refreshed or redesigned 50s, that it's the best of life for those who let go of old roles and find a renewal of purpose. But then she just kind of stops there. She doesn't talk so much about folks who live far beyond that. Our congregation is filled full of people that live far beyond that. I'm going to put a pin in that too. I'm coming back around to that. There's a lot more she can say about midlife crises too. Now, I tried to think visually, how can I show you some images of what midlife crisis might look like to me? So Steve back there, hit it. Well, here now the adventure begins. All right? Ever tried that? Okay. John, yeah. John's got one of those. When did you get that? How old were you when you bought that bike?
7. No.
Oh, how old?
Well, this last one in the year 2000.
In the year 2000, the last one. So he's had one for a while. Okay, yeah. That looks great, but it looks a little scary as well. All right, next. Paramotoring. Okay. Any ice climbers here? Okay. The tightrope walker. All right, do you know who that is? That's somebody in your midst. Actually, he's not here today. He's out on holiday. And I had a video of it that I couldn't figure out, Amber, we couldn't clip it. That is Mr. Reed Dolly wakeboarding at 70. You should have seen the video. He did not fall once. The old boy still got it, doesn't he? Absolutely. And then the next one. Reaching for the stars. Is that midlife crisis when you reach for the stars? Do you still let yourself reach for the stars even at the age that you are? If not, why not? Is it only at midlife that we do these crazy things? What other kinds of crazy things have we done at different times in our life? You know, some people have affairs. I've dealt with plenty of people who have done that. We need to talk that through. Some of us buy convertibles or motorcycles. Some of us decide to embrace our gray. I'm not there yet, but I know those of you who have decided to do that. Some of you quit a job without having another job, or you completely change careers. Some of the folks I've known have sold their home and everything in it and took to RVing, and they've been all over the United States a couple of times. Or maybe you go to India to an ashram for 2 months like one of my friends did. Or you walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain. Then there are other people that have learned how to embrace life in their older years. Laura Kramer's dad is a serious cyclist and skier at age 82. We did a bike ride yesterday in Portland, and she said, "Man, you couldn't keep up with my dad if you tried." And I said, "Well, that's for sure. I know that. He is serious." I said, "I am not going to be riding with him." He took up cycling and skiing in retirement. He retired in his 50s. Or you could be like George Kent and you could ski on Mount Hood till you're 95. Or you could be like Mike Keith's mother, Catherine, who is a 90 now, close to 92, and is a world record weight lifter. Did you know that? Skydiving on her 70th birthday. Why not? Why not? So when you think about the prodigal son, as I mentioned earlier, look at the stories and the possibility of the age that he might have been, maybe in the 20s or so. By the way, Bob told you, or John told you, that some 11 parables in John's or Luke's gospel. This is the only place in the gospels that this parable appears. So we think that Luke got it from what we call the Q source, a source that wasn't available to the other gospel writers because he has several stories like that. So does Matthew, but this is unique to Luke's gospel. So in his 20s, perhaps, the prodigal son trying on a new way of living. According to the Lucan scholars that I've studied, it's important to know that what he did was defy Jewish custom and tradition. You never ask for an inheritance before your daddy's gone, and you certainly don't ask for it as a younger son. My scholarly reading also suggested in order for him to get the money, he probably had to sell ancestral land. The height of disgrace to his family. Maybe he was going through some restlessness in his faith. I found myself wondering, was it easy for him to leave because he didn't hold the faith that his family held? Maybe he had given up on the faith. Maybe the Jewish faith for him was too old and outdated. Maybe it was too rule-laden. Maybe it needed something new and fresh. Maybe he was a prober and he just wanted to explore and test what he believed or not, or maybe he was in the midst of a faith crisis. For those of you whom I've given the handouts, I'd like for you to pass those out now. Just like life can be full of transitions and is, our faith also has transitory times. And you may or may not have studied a process about faith and its development. And of course, I know this is rather prescriptive, but I think it's kind of enlightening to know and to see where you might see yourself on this and where you might have seen yourself in this in the midst of your life. So back in seminary, I was exposed to a beautiful professor named James W. Fowler III. He was a United Methodist minister. He was also the director of the Center for Research on Faith and Moral Development and a researcher for the Center of Ethics. He was a professor of theology and human development. And what he talked about is that our faith goes through periods of development. Well, in fact, he talked about 6 different stages of development. Make sure everybody has one. So in doing this work and writing this book, he interviewed 600 people, ages 4 to 88. And they were Jews, Catholics, Protestants, agnostics, and atheists. He looked at various ways that our lives have meaning and purpose, windows into what he called faith. Now, it's important to know that faith for him does not necessarily mean that you're religious, but it might mean that it is your way of leaning into or making sense of your world. I've thrown this term at you, but it's worth hearing. There's a term called theodicy. Theodicy, which says that every one of us has to have some way that we make sense of life and the tragedies in life. For example, how will the Bahamians make sense of what's happened to them with Dorian? How will those who've lost children make sense of that? How will those of us who've suffered tragedies make sense of that? How will those of us who have struggled with the grief of the loss of a loved one make sense? A theodicy. We have to have some way to lean into or understand life's difficulties. And for him, faith is a dynamic system of images and values and commitments that guides one's life. So that if a person doesn't consider themselves religious, they might pour their faith or themselves into their children or their grandchildren or their ability to take care of themselves and to take care of their health, or they may pour themselves into traveling and experiencing the world. But we all have to have a reason for which to live and to keep going. And that's a universal thing, whether you're a person of religious faith or not. Sadly, some people do not choose to keep going. They have no values or commitments or anything that they feel is left for them, so they choose suicide. Or they choose to live a lesser life than they could live. They give up on life. So these 6 stages of faith, let me just quickly whip through them. Stage 0, of course, is just those early stages of faith, 0 to 2, where if you grew up in a home that loved and nurtured you, then you develop the sense of love and trust of the world and of the people around you. You move, and if you didn't have that, then early on, there's a sense of distrust that begins to develop. When you enter stage 1, an intuitive projective faith, 2 to 7 years of age is when people are usually this. It's a relative fluidity of patterns and thoughts. Religion is learned mainly through experiences, stories, and images, and people with whom we come in contact. So that stories like Noah's Ark or Jonah and the whale, it would never cross the child's mind to think that those stories were not true, for example, as some feel that they aren't. They would take them as literal because that's the way their mind works at that age. Then you get to the mythical, literal faith, mostly in school-age children, where you have a strong belief in justice and reciprocity of the universe. Deities are anthropomorphic. During this time, metaphors and symbolic language are misunderstood and taken literally, as I mentioned earlier. I get a very concrete stage. Then you get to a synthetic, conventional faith arising in adolescence and 12, when you begin to have questions. Was it about that time? I don't know what. I don't know if I believe that, but I'm going to go. Of course, my parents said I have to go, but I'm not sure about that Bible story anymore. I'm not sure about the preacher. I'm not sure about the church, all of those things. So you begin to have questions, but you may be more silent about it. Those conflicts you may keep to yourself because you don't want to create waves or issues. Then you get into those latter stages where usually in your 20s and late 30s you develop stage 4, a stage of angst and struggle. You take personal responsibility for your feelings. You're able to reflect on your own beliefs, and you are openness to complexities of faith, but it also can create a faith crisis for you because you become aware of inconsistencies. You can't make sense of those things. And for some people, this is a faith crisis. Stage 5 really can be a midlife crisis, a real faith crisis, where you begin to look at some of the symbols that were inherited. For example, the concepts of heaven or hell, which some understand to be literal. We may, in this stage, understand to be maybe more symbolic of what it means to be separated from God, or what it means to have our spirit live on forever. However that shakes out. Do you see what I'm saying? And then we get to a stage 6, a universalizing faith, or what some would call enlightenment, where an individual would treat any person with compassion. You view that all people are part of the family of faith or a universal community and should be treated with principles of love and grace. And it's not that important to you whether or not you necessarily have a religious faith. For some, it continues to be extremely important, but you've grown and matured in the faith. Now, folks, can you see that why sometimes you have issues with other people in their faith walks? Because you may be at different stages in the journey. Some people stay early on and never grow out of that. Okay? Some people advance way off the scale and you're not like, come back down to earth. Where are you in this mystic stuff? The point is, we all find ourselves in a part of a process and on a journey. We're not all at the same place. So faith, just like life, has transitions. And they can each be beautiful, but they have more meaning when we understand what they're about. Lastly, as we close up, Gail Sheehy decided that, you know what, life has become too rich and full in these latter years. I'm not finished with this novel or this study that I did. The people are living longer and life has more meaning, and they're taking longer to grow up. They're playing longer. Look at all the folks at Mary's Woods, for Pete's sake. They haven't forgotten how to play. They're reinventing themselves. She says, think of yourself as developing a new infancy at age 45, where life starts all over again, and you invest in new things and new people and new ideas. You take on a new hobby. You change jobs, or maybe you quit your job, and you don't know what's going to come next, or you choose to leave behind friendships that are weighing you down and develop new friendships. So she says there is a second adulthood that we all need to live into, and that we have the ability by God's grace to map our own course, to chart our own life and not let it just be prescriptive or proscriptive. The last thing I'll leave with you is these last two questions that are in the bulletin, question 1 and question 3. When something new calls you, what do? How do you test the call? How do you test whether it's valid or not, whether you're going to follow it? And what's at risk if you do follow it, if you do take that new step? Or the third question, what are you being called to next? Are you on schedule? Are you on schedule for a crisis about now? Or are you going to take your wings and fly and take a leap of faith? And then finally, how does God fit into that whole process of life transition, faith transition, and any other thing to which God may be calling you? Next week, we're going to talk about the transition processes, having an ending, how it starts with an ending of something, what in you has to die before something new can begin, and then the neutral zone that we find ourselves in, where everything seems kind of shaky and uncertain, and then a fresh new beginning. And then in the weeks ahead, we're going to talk about grief and all the ways that we encounter it through loss of every kind. My hope is that as we do this, that if you follow a rabbit down a rabbit hole, whether you step into it willingly or you fall into it, that you'll have some tools to know how to dig yourself out of it, and that you'll let the Holy Spirit refine and help you do so. Thanks be to God.